Hello, everyone. Welcome to Talking Logistics, where we have conversations with thought leaders and newsmakers in the supply chain logistics industry. It's my great pleasure to welcome Dan Gilmore, who's Chief Marketing Officer at Softeon. And today we're going to talk about the role and benefits of warehouse execution systems. Now, like in so many other areas of supply chain management, warehousing operations today are much more complex, dynamic, and automated than ever before. And as a result, the technology landscape within warehouses continues to evolve and expand. And one example of that is the growing role and importance of warehouse execution systems. So what is a WES, and why is it needed, and how does a WES work, and what are some of its benefits? What benefits does it provide? Well, those are some of the main questions we're going to discuss in today's episode. And it's great to have Dan on the program to share his insights and perspective on this topic. I've known Dan for more than 20 years, spanning his many roles as an industry analyst, executive at several software companies, and of course, as president and founder of Supply Chain Digest, which I'm sure many of you, read and follow as I do. So Dan, welcome to the program.
Adrian, thanks for having me. We're really excited about it. It's great what you've done with this platform here, and very much looking forward to talking about WES.
Great. Well, Dan, I mean, you and I would often meet, at industry conferences, at least 2 or 3 times a year. We'll bump into each other at CSCMP or, other conferences, and always have a chance to catch up. But obviously the last couple of years, we haven't had a chance to really meet at in-person conferences. So it's great to, catch up here, at least in the virtual realm. So again, thank you for making the time. So let's just, dive into the topic here. I mean, I think that, most people, I would hope, are familiar with what a warehouse management system is and are using one these days, particularly if they're in any kind of, e-commerce environment or any kind of volume that they're running. And certainly there's been a lot of discussion around warehouse control systems as well. So I think a lot of people are familiar with that. But I think, as with myself, I wasn't as familiar with the, warehouse execution system. So why don't we start there? I mean, what is a WES, and just as importantly, why is it needed?
Yeah, it's great. It's kind of funny because it's actually a product that's been around for a while, yet in many respects, it's also very new to the market, and we'll talk about that a little bit. So kind of the history here is actually some number of years back, there were a very small number, 2 or 3 kind of companies associated with the materials handling industry that really, made some arguments that WMS was falling short in automated facilities because it wasn't caring enough about the utilization of the materials handling equipment. And typically that would be, sortation systems, et cetera. And anybody that's been in a warehouse knows it would get a lot of peaks and valleys and a lot of kind of downtime and whatever. And so they proposed some, mathematical, if you will, based solutions to level loading that work on the automation, and in the end, therefore getting more throughput. And certainly there was some very much truth in that, although, company like Softeon had a WMS that always had, capabilities to sense what's happening on materials handling equipment and flowing the work accordingly. But nevertheless, so the early WES vendors did have a point. Now, it kind of stayed as a very niche type product for a long time. But then, most recently, just kind of as the market awareness of how do we get more out of the facilities we've got, how do we get more out of that equipment, how do we get more productivity generally, started to really gain some, importance. WS has now started to really gain some market momentum, and there's a lot of interest both in automated and non-automated sites about WES. We'll talk about that. So, what is WES? It's something that sort of sits between WMS and WCS. Unfortunately, there's really no clear market definition, and there's a lot of companies claiming to have a WES, but there's huge variation in the actual capability. So you got to do your homework. But I'll just say it's software that kind of sits on top of a WMS. In Softeon's case, that could be our own WMS or a third-party WMS, like a legacy system or a aging best of breed or ERP WMS or whatever. And I'm going to say use the terms orchestrates and optimizes order fulfillment in a way even beyond what a tier 1 WMS like Softeon's or other WMSs can do. And one of the things that that really resonated for me when I first kind of got it in my head is key difference between WMS and WES is that WES is always on. It's always monitoring and listening to what's happening in the environment, and then making proactively making smart, optimized decisions accordingly, just in a different way than the WMS approaches the work. So I'll just real quickly go through some of the the capabilities that, you likely to be in a WMS. And, number one, it's just very granular granular visibility to what's happening in different areas within the distribution center. That could be case picking as a whole, or that could be each level of a multi-level case pick module, setup or whatever. So, it's looking at activity, it's looking for bottlenecks, and that goes into both, creating operational dashboards that I can see what's happening at each, node or processing area within the distribution center. But it's also that, it helps supervisors and managers, but it's also that same data that the WES is using to make those smart business decisions. So that's one thing. Second, looking for advanced labor planning. There's so much concern about labor now in terms of both the availability and cost, and companies just need better tools to manage that. So, in Softeon's case, we're actually using simulation of the order flow that is expected for a day and other inputs to compare that against the resources that we have, and coming up with what I'll call is a time phase plan. What's going to happen between 8 and 9, 9 to 10, 10 to 11, in terms of where labor is needed, and then dynamically allocating that labor throughout the day. Very important, very, very in terms of the current environment. Really, though, the thing that starts to really get me excited is the order optimization and orchestration that I talked about. In our particular case, that means a dynamic set of rules, a dynamic rules engine that's going to drive the flow of work. And what does that mean? Well, a dynamic rules engine is one that's based on conditions. What's happening is not a fixed decision tree. It's a decision tree that's aware of what's actually happening in a facility at any point in time. And then, optimally, automatically releasing work to the floor based on a whole bunch of different variables, the order priorities, the capacities, the workload, all of these kind of things. And really what, Gartner and others are calling the autonomous warehouse. One of the real insights that we had in terms of developing this was that how much even in a very good, warehouse with a very good WMS, there's still a lot of manual decision-making. And frankly, just in many cases, the WES or the computer can make it better and process all of that information. And so this notion of being able to just automatically flow work to the floor without the need for human touch really is a game changer in the industry. And this is where you get into it's not the only thing, but it's where you get into things like waveless processing versus wave-based processing, and et cetera. And then one important thing really key to note here is that one of the things that we view as a little bit differently is that WES is not only very good for heavily automated systems, it can work just fine in manual systems as well. And we'll talk a little bit about that a little bit more in the use cases.
Yeah, I mean, I think you provided a nice high level overview of WES and kind of some of the key capabilities and value that it adds. I mean, when you and I first talked about this, I mean, I was trying to wrap my head around it as well and trying to come up with a definition. Of course, I related it to another term that also has definitional problems, and that is control tower. But I almost kind of viewed it as kind of a microcosm of a control tower, where it's taking the data, the information, visibility to what's happening at the warehouse, what's happening with, orders coming in and so forth, and really orchestrating, the taking that information, synthesizing it, and then running it through optimization and so forth to then, helping to, flow that product through the warehouse as efficiently as possible. I mean, that was kind of my, quick, way of trying to conceptualize a WES.
Yeah, I think I'd add to that, of course, as you say, control towers, many definitions of that, but I think I'd phrase it as a smart control tower. And if you put a smart control tower for the four walls of a distribution center, I think that would be a fairly accurate characterization. So
probably the best way to kind of paint the picture is actually to talk through some, specific use examples, in cases of how, WS works and its benefits. Can you share some of that, in terms of, maybe with some of the clients that you've worked with and how they've deployed this and some examples there of the benefits they've achieved?
Sure. So, let's like something as simple as, manual cart picking, which is, probably the most predominant way that piece picks at least are done in a distribution center. How do you organize that work and release it to cart pickers in a way that best balances, both efficiency needs, especially early in the day, and then, making sure all the work is done in a timely way. You can just, what is the batch? What does the order batch or the order pool look like? How big does it need to be before you start releasing work? Because the bigger the batch you have to work with, the more optimization you have. Okay. And so, there's a lot of variables there. There's the order priority. There's what's the cart configuration. Do you have just one type of cart? Or do you have some carts that are 3x3 and some that are 4x4, or whatever the different permutations of that are? Often that's the case. Obviously, you're trying to minimize across, say you have 20 cart pickers, you're trying to minimize travel distance, and that has to play into how you assign orders to a specific cart. How many free carts do you have at any one point in time? How many pickers do you have available? You thought you had 20, only 15 showed up. So all of that goes into the fact that when a cart picker scans a cart ID, the WES is going to, in effect, dynamically assign the orders to that cart, the 9 orders or the 12 orders or the 16 orders or whatever it happens to be. So, and how do you do that in that optimal way? It's very complicated, actually. But there's even more, how do you do if all of a sudden a hot order comes down that needs to go out in an hour? How do I automatically, take one of the orders off of the cart that hasn't been started yet and the pick still lies in front of me, and insert that dynamic hot order into that same cart in a way that the operator doesn't even know that it happened? They wouldn't know that it happens, okay? And then we also have this notion of a perpetual card where in use, where in some cases, if a order is on a cart is complete, you can actually drop that cart and it drops onto a takeaway conveyor and dynamically insert another order onto that. So rather than being limited, it looked like, to the 16 slots that you had on that cart, maybe you can get 20 or 24 different orders on that same cart. Dynamically changes, the thinking about capacity. So that's one example. Another example that I love, and we're certainly seeing, great uptake in the use of so-called put walls. I don't know how well everyone in the audience understands that, but greatly simplifying, it's a picking technology or strategy that involves putting orders into a structure like a series of cubby holes. And when the orders are complete, on the back end, light goes on and tells the packer this order is done. They take those items, put it into a box, and off it goes. So it's actually quite a bit of optimization opportunities that come in with put walls. You need to kind of balance the order picking side, where you're trying to drive efficiencies through batch picking, and then the putting process into the front end of those walls. And how do I do that most effectively? So usually you're not going to have all of the capacity to handle all of your orders through a put wall. In many cases, like single line item orders, put walls aren't even the way to go. So what a WES can do is say, okay, this pool of orders, say I have 1,000 orders and I've got 500 put wall slots, which are the best 500 orders that I want to run through the put wall? Okay, and it takes some sophisticated algorithms, to figure that out. And then, things like looking at that convent monitoring that I talked about there. What if there's congestion for some period of time with the put wall for any number of reasons? Do I have another route, say as a manual cart pick, to get that work done and get it to packing? So the WMS is going to be smart enough and condition aware enough to say, okay, for this period of time, I need to reroute orders that would have been best for the put wall, but can right now, because of congestion, should go to cart picking until the put wall congestion clears up, and then I can route the rest of the orders through the put wall as I normally would expect to go. And then just one more example, and this is a great example, real customer, apparel type company, soft goods company, that didn't have had very limited sortation capacity and room in their distribution center, and for a variety of physical reasons, that sorter system couldn't be expanded. So it became a huge constraint, the constraint on throughput. And what they were having was inconsistent. Getting back to the kind of the original value prop of a WES, they couldn't get the throughput was very inconsistent. Peaks and valleys, dry time, whatever. And each idle minute, on that sortation system where there wasn't much product coming through is lost capacity. So what we were able to do is implement the WES and significantly improve the flow to the small number of diverts on the sortation system, and was able to therefore dramatically increase the throughput of the whole DC. And key to this was, very small, very limited automation opportunity here. So this is a lot of, kind of more manual picking, but then utilizing the sortation system. And you just can't do this with better wave planning. You need a smart, condition-aware ability to release the work based on what's happening on the automation, as we just discussed. So some exciting examples, I could go on, but here's, I think, some real opportunities for companies to, take their operations to the next level.
Yeah, no, great examples there. And as you were going through those examples, it struck me. And again, and this going back to the analyst days, right? Historically, when we talked about quote unquote execution systems, it was all about kind of automating, manual processing and quote unquote planning systems. That's where the optimization and the smart mathematics, was in. But really what in all these examples that you've talked about, even though we're calling this warehouse execution systems, optimization and advanced mathematics and algorithms are really a key part of this, right?
Oh, absolutely. And I mean, we're heading towards, we'll maybe touch on this before the end of the broadcast, but we're talking about the advent of the smart warehouse, and there's no question there. It's not only WES, there's other components to that. Obviously, you got things like machine learning and AI and all that goes into that, which are certainly being applied within WES as well. But yeah, this is a new level of intelligence and smarts and conditional, decision making. That is just different than the way WMS has thought about the problem historically.
Right. Now, does WES provide benefits, beyond the warehouse, like in, transportation?
Well, that's an interesting, question. I mean, primarily it is a distribution center, kind of four-wall technology. So, the initial response might be, maybe not that much, but that's not really true. So here's one interesting example. If you've been into any e-commerce warehouses, really any kind of warehouses, but especially in e-commerce, they may have multiple cutoff times if they're using multiple carriers, especially. It can depend on service, but the UPS truck cut off at 5 o'clock, or the FedEx at 6 o'clock, or whatever it happens to be. And often, shippers struggle to get all the orders that they've made commitments for onto those trucks in a timely way. And frankly, I've seen it where there's a certain amount of, I'll call it chaos. Maybe that's too strong of a word, but that's approximate of, kind of what happens with everyone scrambling and often not getting everything on the truck that needs to go. So with WES, a couple of things. First off, and this is again the smarts of WES, at the beginning of the day with the orders, you're really focusing, you got all this work that needs to be done, and that gives you the best opportunities to optimization, because the more variables, if you will, in play, or the more tasks that are involved, the more you can combine those in ways that drive the biggest efficiency. Okay, but then as the day goes on, the shift needs to adjust from focus on productivity to starting to focus on service and customer commitments. And the WES has the capability to do that automatically. And one of the things WES, at least in Softeon's case, can do is calculate, if you will, the time it's going to take to pick and transport orders from the picking areas through packing and onto the truck, and do so in a way that automatically releases the worker. It doesn't have to be a human being releasing waves to do this. The WS is going to automatically release those work so that the packages that need to get on the UPS truck get on the UPS truck in a timely manner, and do so without the confusion and the chaos, and with certainty and consistency that's going to happen. So that's a way that WS can really benefit the parcel shipping process.
Yeah, that's a great example, and particularly with parcel. I mean, it used to be that right now it would be peak season, right? The holiday season would be when most companies that are involved with parcel shipping in the holidays, would have the biggest headaches. But it's for the past year and a half, it's been peak season all year. Right. So right. This is the scenario you painted is not just a holiday season type of scenario. It's meeting those cutoff times, and the somewhat limited capacity, there's even capacity constraints on the parcel side of things. So that capability has become even more critical over the past year and a half. So as companies start thinking about WES, I mean, what questions should they ask when evaluating and selecting a solution? I mean, what are some important capabilities that they should look for?
Yeah, well, good question. Again, kind of harking to my comments early in the interview here, there are many companies claiming to have WES, and that results in a wide range of capabilities. And especially it's a challenge, I think, for shippers, because WES with the smarts and the algorithms that you talked about here does have a little bit, in some aspects, a black box sort of aspect to it here. So, you got to put in some effort to really separate the contenders from the pretenders, if you will, and obviously based on what it is you need. But, I think clearly, the ability to automate this flow of work to the floor is the kind of foundational capability that's going to define what separates a WES from a WMS. There's more to it, but that's the one that really just resonates with me. And so the WS, should be looking at a range of variables, including order priority, optimization opportunity, resource and inventory availability, carrier cutoff times, and more. It's how the variables that go into how the work is released. And so this isn't the easiest thing to evaluate, frankly. But yet, I think if you ask the right questions and keep at it, you're going to find out who can really deliver these kind of advanced capabilities and who can't. And I'd say in a standalone WES implementation, this is really interesting because it offers the opportunity to kind of turbocharge, if you will, an aging WMS without replacing the entire WMS. You can keep the WMS for doing some inbound stuff in terms of receiving and put away and inventory transactions with the ERP, but then you let the WES take over the rest of optimizing the order fulfillment processes. This is an interest that is really driving a lot of what's going on in the WES market right now. But sometimes in that scenario there, you need some additional capabilities. So having a WMS also in the portfolio, as Softeon does, just as an example, allows you to kind of borrow some of these capabilities from WMS and add them to WES to just tailor the solution a little bit more ideally to what a customer wants. And a great example of that would be cartonization functionality. That's been a WMS capability for a long time, but sometimes in the WES implementation, you need that too. I want to look for something that you can has the flexibility and the componentry that you can bring over those other capabilities. And the last thing I just add is the ability to support cloud deployment. Cloud has not been very common, frankly, in WES to date, but it's really for all kinds of reasons the way to go. And one of the things that Softeon can do is set up a private cloud environment and then support any number of individual DCs with their own unique WES setup and configuration. This is a real advantage to companies, and it's a big change with because existing WESs have been very on-premise centric.
A lot of great points there. I mean, the last 2 points that you brought up, I think are interesting and important too. I mean, obviously the cloud piece, I mean, I think, just about every category of supply chain software has moved in that direction, but even just the architecture itself, you talked about, componentization and the ability to, leverage components perhaps from a WMS to build the ultimate solution that you need, combining the WES capabilities from certain aspects or capabilities of a WMS and being able to, integrate those together via services, based architecture, which I think is another direction that the industry has been moving in, right?
Absolutely. So that's exactly right. And very great of you to pick that up. So a lot of opportunity there to do that if you've got, the right set of capabilities, the right architecture, as you indicated.
So, as a way to wrap up, then, Dan, you've been, you've probably you've certainly been through more warehouses than I have over your career, and you certainly have kept a pulse on the evolution of what's been happening in warehousing operations for a long time. So, how do you see, warehouse technology, the technology landscape, both software and the automation side of things, evolving over the next 2 years? I mean, over the next few years? I mean, what excites you the most about the future of warehousing technology?
Yeah, well, we're certainly entering into some interesting times. I mean, clearly the trend towards automation, in some cases, heavy automation, is becoming the new normal. I mean, obviously we've had automation around for decades, but now, as I mentioned earlier, the labor availability, labor costs, and the declining costs in many types of automation, especially mobile robots, is driving significant interest from all kinds of companies, even some that a few years ago wouldn't have thought automation was for them. But we can't, when we do that, especially in these heavily automated facilities, we can't have all these islands of automation. I was recently talking to one apparel company with a heavily automated 2 million square foot distribution center, but despite all the investment they made, throughput in that facility is actually declining. And they keep, why is that? Well, because the automation was built for specific purposes and use cases, but they keep getting new customers and new requirements and other things they have to do. And what the guy I would talk to said, the only solution that they had was they keep adding wave types. They've got now have like 75 or 80 different wave types. And it's just the whole system is just backed up and the flow of goods is not happening. And so, there's an opportunity to add WES into the mix here and synchronize the flow of work across all these, process areas and types of automation, and really be aware of the constraints and meter the flow of work according to that. So, I mean, that's a whole new way of thinking about, the problem there. And, and tied to that, as I indicated previously, this, automated release of work, what some are calling the autonomous warehouse, really is a game changer. I mean, for WMS is a great product. We've got to find one. But, to a certain extent, the industry has only had, kind of incremental progress for a couple of decades here in core WMS, I guess I call it. This automatic release of work and and doing so in a very smart context aware way is a step change. It's not incremental change, it's a step change. So these are very exciting times. We're moving to the era of the smart warehouse. We're really already here now. And I think it's going to, change the way everybody thinks about warehouse software over the next 5 years.
I love the term the smart warehouse because I think that for a long time, and I'm glad that it's changed, but I think, back when I started, when you started, people viewed logistics and, whether it's transportation, warehousing, as just a cost center, as a kind of a blue collar, low tech, no tech, type of environment. And those are things that happen on the back lot of the building, and certainly I think that was the perspective of many CEOs and CFOs that really didn't understand, that's the stuff that happens in the back end. You fast forward to today, and I think every CEO, CFO, obviously over the past year and a half, fully appreciates the role and importance of supply chain and logistics to their business. But just as importantly, when you look at everything that's happening in technology right now, and the warehouse in many ways is kind of leading the way with robotics, leading the way with a lot of this optimization and machine learning and so forth that we touched upon here today. So it truly is, an area of, particularly when I talk to a lot of students, they always think about Apple and Google and all these, high tech areas. And I always say, there's a lot of exciting technology oriented things happening in the supply chain logistics realm. So, don't overlook it because there's a lot of opportunities in this area. So Dan, again, great to catch up. Appreciate you making the time to, help educate us on what is a warehouse execution system, its role and benefits, and kind of what the future looks like. So again, appreciate you making the time to be with us today.
I enjoyed it so much, Adrian. Thanks for the opportunity. I thought it was a fine discussion, and hopefully we'll do one again before too long.
Great. I want to thank those of you that joined us. If you're watching this episode on demand, either at the Softeon website or on Talking Logistics, and you've got a question or a comment for Dan, you can post it there, and I'm sure he'll be more than happy to respond via that medium. Again, thank you for joining us, and look forward to seeing you in a future episode of Talking Logistics. Have a great day.